Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and I'm also a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I wanted to talk about how eye contact reveals attraction towards someone. And this video is going to be particularly aimed at if a woman is attracted to a man, but a lot of these don't necessarily have to be. A little bit more, but not necessarily. But I'm going to also deconstruct the research a little bit. And obviously, a lot of you guys know I'm looking at my notes that I've written on my laptop. So sometimes I'm going to be glancing at my notes. It's because I want to make sure what I'm saying is accurate, not just from memory, because a lot of this stuff I think is important to know, and it's not beneficial if I get some of the facts wrong. Plus, that's not going to make sense with the citations. So, the first one is that actually eye contact does activate arousal to some extent, right? Basically, on the skin surface, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Research does find and suggest direct eye contact, even brief, does increase arousal measured by, we're going to talk about how it was measured, the skin's electrical, conductivity, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more than averted gaze. So even just a little bit of direct eye contact does do something to someone. Now, arousal it's registered in the part of the brain that we kind of, what tends to be registered in that part of the brain is any sort of attention and emotional reaction. And eye contact does exactly that to your brain. And then there's also bodily arousal as well. And when I mean particularly, I don't mean in such a, I'm just saying from like the skin perspective. I'll talk about it in more detail. The research in 2011, basically, there was electrodermal activity, which is basically what the arousal I'm talking about, okay? It measures the skin's conductivity, which, how would I even describe it? Okay, so the sweat glands, okay, that we have on our skin, that activity was increased, okay? So the sweat gland activity, it kind of rised due to the nervous system, the activation of the nervous system's arousal. So that person has some arousal based on their nervous system to which the increased activity of the sweat gland. So that's what was measured, okay? If that makes sense. So that's what we're considering as arousal. It's common when individuals feel aroused by any sort of highly sensitive, it's not conscious at all. It's subconscious. And we do this in psychology and other sciences to measure emotion, stress, attention, or cognitive load. So this is not just like a random thing for this particular research. This is something that has been used a lot in many different ways. And this is accurate to a lot of extent, right? Understanding that this is occurring when an individual gives eye contact, I think is imperative to understand what eye contact actually does for and to an individual. The next one is mutual gaze. So this is a little bit different than direct eye contact, even for a brief moment. We've already discussed that there are some effects to an individual psychologically and for their own bodily function as well. However, mutual gaze is a little bit different. It's when two individuals, I suppose, lock eyes for a particular amount of time. That particular amount of time, we are going to talk about that based on the research, but it doesn't have to be this length. We just use that time for the research. So mutual gaze, where both people are basically looking at each other or gazing at each other, increases feelings of affection and romantic connection, but typically it's going to be, so increases romantic affection and connection. It doesn't have to be that you fall in love necessarily. If you're already in love, that can benefit. However, what we see is that eye contact does some sort of social and emotional impact. Basically, that's it, which means you might feel a little bit more closer or curious about the person, like even in the depths of being more friendly with this person or just being more aware of them. And so this research is kind of old, and there is some research that does show that this may be slightly biased or needs a little bit more construction on the evaluation and methods being used. However, it still has some benefits. It's just the romantic and the loving feelings might not be as prominent, but basically in 1989, it showed that pairs who are, let me just try and word it like this, individuals who are looking at each other's eyes, they engage in like 2 minutes of uninterrupted mutual gaze, and they did report higher affection and loving feelings than those in other conditions. Okay, and so from that perspective, is there some benefit and truth to this? Yes. However, there's a lot of other things. You can look at the research as well. However, it doesn't mean that suddenly you stare at someone for 2 minutes and you guys fall in love. That's not what it means. It just means that there's a little bit more curiosity and depth. That's really all that is. The next one is eye contact changes how we process social interactions. This one, it has a lot of research behind it, but I'm going to particularly pick on the one in 2023. However, this one that's one of the foundations, I believe, why eye contact is common in humans and possibly other animals as well, because this is something that there's a lot of benefits to this particular one. Face-to-face eye contact is actually not that common in natural conversations. Actually, a lot of natural conversations might happen side to side, shoulder to shoulder, or doing activities or things like that. Not all the time, but when it does happen, actually we can see a more predictable social engagement behavior that follows. Basically, it supports the idea, the best way to put it is when people choose to establish eye contact, it carries, how would I even describe it? It carries a lot of information for researchers, and that's the best way to put it. The eye contact is something that individuals subconsciously know can be a little bit intimate to some extent. And so when we realize how uncommon eye contact is, the choice of when an individual does choose to make eye contact is not just random, is what this research is saying. It shows a lot of how that individual will process that emotional and social interaction, and how you will, let's say as the receiver, also process that interaction, meaning that typically it's going to be perceived as more important to both of you guys. And so the better way to put it is sometimes when somebody's angry at you and let's say you're in a relationship and your wife is mad at you or something, you might see her staring at you and she's not breaking that eye contact. It's because you know what she's saying is important, right? Now, another thing is she might be really happy and she might look at you and she smiles at you even for a brief second and she says, "I miss you." In your mind, you're going to remember, okay, I was gone for, whatever amount of time and she obviously missed me a lot. Those are contexts in your mind that you process this social interaction with a little bit more importance. And so in 2023, the research does show that real interactions were observed and found that direct eye contact interactions, even if it's brief and infrequent, predicted, how do I even explain it? Predicted follow-up gazes and more deeper interactions comparison to those individuals who did not have any direct eye contact during that interaction. Okay, so basically it just shows that it can kind of benefit or build onto stronger connections. Eye contact, the next one is shared eye contact, can increase arousal more than passive viewing, passive glancing, something of that sort. This was in 2019, okay? Eye contact eye contact is an active exchange, right? If two people give each other some form of eye contact, it is active. And when two people do this and it's more of a gaze, where it's probably more than like maybe half a second, it does show that there's a meaningful social interaction and potential attraction-based context. And so if a stranger gives you some sort of a gaze, there is some intention behind it. Whether if it's eye contact, right? If it's something else, that could be different. But if they're looking at your eyes, typically maybe they're thinking about, oh, this person looks like my ex. They might not realize that it's attraction, but a part of it is still coming from attraction, right? They might not even have much direct thoughts, but usually if they're looking at your eyes, there is some sort of signal there. The next one is eye movements may reflect attraction or desire. Like gaze allocation. And I'm going to explain this. I've talked about this point on my channel before, but it's still part of the research. And this one is 2017. The patterns of gaze differ when people are looking for potential romantic partners versus when they're just looking at you as a friend. And so we'll see like more longer, more focused attention on particular parts when judging a potential mate. These gaze patterns are usually linked to, I would say, like social goals, such as getting married or having a relationship, attraction, basically. And what basically the research does show is that people who are, I guess, viewing you as a potential partner, they're going to fixate on certain parts. We've already talked about women. The first part they fixate on is your chest. I've made a video on that, and then followed by the pelvic region and other areas of that sort. And so women look at these areas to kind of compare you, whether she realized it or not, to see if you are a potential mate for her. And that supports that gaze allocation that can reflect interest. So that's what we're looking at for this particular one, okay? So I want to go over some limitations or like caveats about what this video is talking about and what it's not talking about, is a better way to put it. It's not like there's some sort of, I don't know, 3-second rule, you stare at somebody and you fall in love type of deal. No, that's not necessarily what I'm saying. A lot of times with research, we're looking at the same time interval simply so that we can eliminate other variables or bias and try and replicate the results or see what other variables are changing so we can look at the research in a more clean and preferred way. It's just ethical. The next one is context matters. Social norms and cultural norms and personality and things like that does influence eye gaze quite a bit, particularly cultural norms. I'm from the United States. I'm born in the United States. I've actually never been, which probably makes me very boring, I've actually never been outside of the United States once. I've never, ever stepped foot out of this country. I know no other culture from a direct standpoint. I've only been here. And so I'm going to perceive it based on what I know. And any other researcher will do the same. So when you guys read it, maybe you're from a different country, you'll see it differently than I do to some extent. That's okay. And in the United States, staring at someone in the eyes is not like a common thing. And then averting gaze is also not something that's common either, right? It's just, there is some extent, but like in the United States, it's not like totally offensive to glance at somebody. It doesn't mean you have to not look at your elders or something. I've heard some cultures are like that. I don't really know if that's common here. I've never heard of things like that. Maybe, but it's definitely not common in the state I'm in. And so context and culture matters. The next one is, it's true. Laboratory conditions do differ from natural flirting and connection and experience. It's going to be different. And so just keep that in mind, that real world attraction it's going to be different. And so basically the takeaways of this is that direct gaze does increase arousal. Mutual eye contact strengthens emotional connection. I would say eye contact timing and choice are behavior signals. They're not random. They're behavior signals. They're not random. Interactive gaze has a social impact, and gaze allocation does show some forms of attraction. I hope this video has helped with somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.